Hi everyone, my name is Anna Tsymbalist, and I'm joined by Pappas today, an amazing marketing practitioner with, I think, already 9 years of experience, right?
About 9 years, yeah, coming up on it.
Thank you so much for joining. Alex has experience in creating and implementing go-to-market strategies that are account-based, and actually he does that from the first impression, like from the first pipeline generation touch point to expansion. And I think that actually explains a lot the topic that we chose today because today we're going to talk about MQLs and, well, why we hate them so much. And before we jump before we jump into the topic, let me just give you a brief overview of what you signed up for, Alex, today, and what you guys can expect from this podcast. So, in this podcast, we want to talk about sometimes tough, sometimes controversial topics without glossing over stuff with buzzwords. So when we say things like, oh, we made sure all of the stakeholders are aligned, well, we're actually going to go deep into who are those stakeholders? What does alignment mean in this situation? How do you actually measure it? And what are the top 5 things you do to create this alignment, you know? So if that's something that you're interested in, please stay with us. And let's go. Let's hate on some MQLs. So I think a good way to start doing that is actually talk about why we like them, because a lot of marketers, me included, I was in love with them at first. And that was a system that we worked on for a very long time. And I know that a lot of marketers are still working using that system. Some hate it in the process, some love it in the process. So, Alex, what do you think?
Well, first, let me say thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here. Question around first impressions. What was it? Why did we end up
Yeah,
with the MQL model?
how did we end up with them? Like, how come we are like everyone knows what that is, everyone uses it, everyone, it's a staple. It's a staple. Everyone is obsessed with it. At some point, everyone was obsessed with it. Now we're moving away from that, I feel, but to my liking, at a very low pace.
I would agree with that. I think one thing that stands out about MQLs is that they're they're very easy to measure, and so when you look at early on, you have marketers, you have CEOs, you saw MQLs as this neat little way to kind of quantify interest, kind of that tangible badge of a prospect buying in and saying yes. And, you always want that yes. And it's easy to get seduced by that because it's very easy to gravitate towards like high volume metrics like that. And so when something feels easy to measure and it's easy to report on, um, I think it's really hard to get away from that because when you shift into a different model, say like an MQA or when you're mapping a buying committee, you're not always looking for volume, and so people get scared about that. Am I doing enough? Are we doing enough? And over time, the allure of like the simple numbers and the early stage validation is almost like I think we talked about it before. It's kind of like a love affair. It's like very straightforward. It's very easy to communicate to the board, and it really is that promise of a quick win. But it's really hard to translate that into revenue, and I think most teams find that they are having to manipulate it at some point, right? So regardless of how qualified we feel they are or not, you might get sales complaining at one point that the volume of a marketing qualified um, lead funnel is too low, right? And so when that happens, there's not enough marketing activity to support sales, and so finger pointing starts happening. And when that happens, you just lower the standards of the scoring model for an MQL, and all of a sudden, voila, you're flooding them with a high volume of leads again. Um,
I'm guilty of that. That happened in my life. I wasn't the decision maker.
who's not guilty of doing that, really? Like, if you're in the marketing space, if you're in demand gen, like, who has not had
I
to throttle the scoring model to meet volume goals, right? The vanity
you
metrics.
also you also talked about, it's easy to present to the board, right? And I feel like it's this. blanket that you pull over your stuff when someone's coming over. Like you have all kinds of stuff just shoveled in one pile and covered with a blanket, and that you call that blanket an MQL. That's your scoring model of having an MQL. And it also gives this like feeling of things being predictive because you're like, oh, I know my conversion rates from MQL to SAL to SQL, like whatever kind of funnel you design. But that's actually not the case when you tried doing it because MQLs come from different sources very often. And those sources, like you can never control the quality. And that means that not all MQLs are equal. And that's where your conversion rates somehow, shift quickly. You had a very high conversion rate into an SAL, and then something changed in your strategy, but you still call it an MQL, but those are completely different leads that you are driving. So yeah, I just wanted to add that and kind of interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Not at all. I think it's a great point. I mean, it's kind of this way that people think they're exercising agency over their market, and in reality, um, you're not really adjusting the strategy. You're not really adjusting anything that like nothing of value of really is really addressed when you do that. And so I think you bring up a good point that not all MQLs are created equal either. And when you're not putting it in context of a an account and your footprint at an account, then it almost doesn't matter how much engagement you get from an individual lead. It's not indicative of the mindset at an account if that's really what you're focused on. If you're so myopic on one lead at an account, they might be super engaged, but if you don't have the right footprint there, if you don't have the right relationships built, it's very easy to fall in love with that one lead and then miss out on the party, right? Like so, I think it's very easy to get enamored with a single lead, but it's usually again not indicative of a mindset, and you often miss opportunities by having that hyper focus on an individual.
Yeah, the MQL strategy, it doesn't align with the actual B2B decision making, I think. Because I mean, at this point, we're all very educated. We all know about the buying committee, about the buying group, decision makers, all that stuff. We call them influencers, users, like we have all of those terms, and yet we still want to rely on the leads. And I just want to, I want to make a comment so people who use MQLs don't feel personally attacked here. But it's a completely, like it's logical when you change your qualification to bring more MQLs because in that moment, I think marketing is under a lot of pressure because their CEO or someone comes in and they're like, the sales are doing nothing. We need to give them something to work on. And you're like, I mean, if it's like low season or, something changed, why don't you just give them some leads? Maybe something comes out of it. But then, and it's logical in that moment, like you are extinguishing the fire that's happening. But what that leads to is then sales start ditching MQLs. Sales just disqualify them immediately. They don't want to be wasting time on that if they have experienced that volume of low quality MQLs.
Agreed. And I want to also touch on something that you mentioned earlier around the predictability, especially when it comes to presenting to your executives or the board in particular. And it's very easy to translate volume based goals to them. They feel like, oh, it's up to the right. We're up, 110% on our MQLs. Like you don't always have that type of reporting when you do an account based model, and so it's very easy for people to get nervous when they don't feel like that activity is matched with the volume, right? Like you were saying, make sales feel like they have something to do, when in reality, you don't necessarily report on the number of contacts within an account, right? Like it's not something that you're going to present to the board. So, but it's something that you can incentivize with your sales team. And so, one of the ways that you want to try to maybe shift it is in like how do we report success? Because I run into this too, where people want to know how many MQAs can we expect to have month over month, quarter over quarter. Like they want to have that mindset of predictability. And when you're working on business, B2B deal here in enterprise, um, it's like it's very easy to go back to volume based goals there, even though it's not again indicative of that account. So, um, it's like an account being in market is more valuable than a bunch of MQLs coming in from accounts that aren't in market, right? So like it's kind of like dating somebody at the right time. Like no matter how compatible two people are for each other, if it's the wrong time or the wrong interaction, then sparks probably aren't going to fly. So by not focusing on accounts that are in market and focusing on vanity volume based goals like MQLs, you actually leave a lot more pipeline on the table, and it's hard to translate that into normal reporting that most teams do. And so I think a shift, like a fundamental shift in how people report on things, is also going to be key to how do we kind of move away from that model.
Yeah, some of the things that I think are worth looking at is the account engagement, right? Are you penetrating the account? Are you engaging them? Is there intent that you generated? Is there a demand that you've generated? And looking at your buying committee as as like a whole thing with personas. Obviously you're going to have different personas that you have to approach with different content, with different strategy, right? You're working with different titles most probably, but looking at your accounts that you're after. For instance, if you're doing MQL, I mean, why don't you just see if you have different MQLs from the same account that are your decision makers. But the thing is, if you are going after senior titles, you're not going to get them very often. You're not going to get them sign up for something. They won't give you their information for a report. I mean, I have a fake email that I use to download stuff. I'm sure if you're like a VP level marketer, you are bombarded with calls, with emails, with any sort of outreach, with gifts. We have a channel where our CEO shares like some of the outreach that he receives for us just to take a look. Some of it's funny. So, like you're not gonna submit a form. Who you will get to convert is someone on a lower level in the organization, and if your sales know that that lower level won't get them the deal, and if they're after the more senior people, they are going to disqualify that lead. They're like the chances that they will be like, oh, I'm going to work this lead, get the insights, like in an ideal world, yeah, oh, I'm going to talk to them, I'm going to learn everything about the company, and then I'm going to use that information to go into and try to build a relationship with someone more senior. Well, you have to have like really, really good sales. If you like, you have to have really good sales to do that. That's difficult. Like I'm not saying that's just like high quality, difficult work that needs to be done.
And you were mentioning even like all the different tactics that people can use for a particular lead too. You were mentioning gifting and emails, and we're trying to get these people's attention, in so many different ways. And I heard an expression, have you heard love bomb, when somebody gets love bombed?
Yep, very
Yeah, it's
familiar.
like you're bombarding them with things, and it's like that's a lot of resources and attention to give to somebody who, if you're not mapping it back to the account, or you're not looking at somebody who's in market, then it's like yeah, you can shower them with all these things and all this attention, but like to what end, right? Like that's, I think you have to match it like we have tools now, we have data to show accounts being in market, we have ICPs. Like there's no reason to do that kind of love bombing for an MQL, for lack of a better term, when you don't need to, right? Like that's just a lot of activity that doesn't translate into anything for anybody.
Right. So what happens? Let's just give a quick overview. So we think MQLs are predictable. They're not. Actually, I can share a personal example. We once made a strategical shift at some other company, not where I'm working now. I won't tell you where. So we did content syndication. We're like, we need to, make this quarter more productive. We need to give our sales more leads to work on. So we did some research. We selected one of the best places where we could do some content syndication, and we exceeded our MQL goal by, I don't know, like 300%. Like the spike was insane. But then our poor sales, they spend, I think like for 2 months, they had to go through those trashy leads, through those trashy leads, just disqualifying them. I mean, if I was in that situation, I would just delete the Excel spreadsheet that we sent them to work on because, and I think that's the reality for many salespeople. So yeah, they're not reliable. Like when, let's say you change the source of where they come from and suddenly you exceed your goals, but then the quality is, you know, horrible.
They can get pretty picky at that point, right? Because they don't want to just accept everything. They're gonna want to pull the plug on something a lot sooner based on criteria, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think qualification here, it's not the volume, it's the quality that matters. And salespeople actually understand that. So very often, if it's like a fresh salesperson, they will do what you ask them to do. But a lot of senior salespeople mostly rely on their network and on their connections and on their own efforts to hit their quota because they know, like, from the trenches, they know the difference between high quality leads and random MQL that just dropped into Salesforce, right? So yeah, they ghost them. They ghost them. I'm very much involved with our sales department and with our SDRs. So I interview them because I need to build those processes between marketing and sales so that we're aligned. So I interview them like, what do you think is best? Like, what are the processes? What do you want? And yeah, they tell me, girl, we just dropped those Excel spreadsheets into trash immediately on immediately when receiving them. But it's also an issue when you are sending, intent. It's something that can happen not just with MQLs, I think, but also with intent, especially on account level. If you get that wrong, if you get that set up wrong, if you don't know your keywords, if you, if you can sometimes mistake people logging into your competitor with intent of researching your product. Alex, I actually know that that's something you've set up in the past, and you have a very sophisticated model for intent and engagement capturing. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point around intent, kind of being for intent's sake, and what I've noticed now at a couple different organizations that I've worked at is that people like to set up intent very generically to show interest, but it's showing interest is not the same thing as showing intent. And so, from a marketing orchestration standpoint, if you're getting very high level, broad intent around maybe your brand or your category, you might see that people are interested, but you have no idea if they're in market or what they're trying to solve for, right? And when we've designed intent, we've really had those two things in mind: is how do we surface accounts that are in market, and then how do we help identify what they're likely trying to solve for and where we add value. And we've done that kind of a number of ways. One is we've actually aligned intent to our solutions and said, okay, what are the use cases associated with them? And how can we say, hey, I see this at my account. I know what it means. I know what they're trying to solve for. And I know who likely cares about it at that corporation or that account. And what do I want to say about it? Where do I add value there? Um, I think people rail against intent sometimes. I've seen a lot of conversations on LinkedIn around how it's ineffective, over relied on, but I think by and large, people are not leveraging intent properly, and that's why they're not seeing the returns. They don't like the anonymity of intent either, but when you can cluster intent keywords around use cases that are aligned to your solutions, and you identify and you kind of align it to how people are doing their research and how they buy, not how you want to sell, but how they want to buy, it's a lot easier to translate that into more digestible data that's more actionable for your sales team and better for your orchestration. So really, it's like you kind of have to start from scratch and understand like what value do we add to the market, what are problems that people are trying to solve for, and organize your intent around that versus around your brand or just competitors or the industry itself. And um, I think when you can identify the specific use cases, you can also take a pretty educated guess on who likely is trying to solve that within an organization, down to department or persona, and sometimes even titles. And when you can directionally give that to your sales team, now they're looking at intent with a new lens and they're building it into their processes to say, I'm not just looking to sell them or asking qualifying questions around our product. If you're surfacing intent around things that we know are use cases for, say, automation or visibility or efficiency or um, compliance purposes, depending on their industry, right? Now the conversation has shifted to what are you trying to solve for and where do we add value? Not talking about yourself, right? Like, and I think that's a fundamental shift that we've seen where we've not only surfaced accounts that are more in market, but we're having better conversations at the sales level because of that, because we're talking about what people want to talk about. We're not talking about ourselves, right? And that's ultimately a better experience for both parties. That's better for the customer, that's better for your prospect, and it's better for the sales team. They're not cold calling, they're not wasting their time. They're not speed dating through stuff anymore. It's really like I can get to my qualification questions a heck of a lot faster by doing it that way than by having to look at an MQL who spent a little bit of time on our website or something, right? Like or downloaded an ebook. Like it's very hard to understand the mindset in an account by a single interaction. So that cumulative look is really, really helpful, not just from marketing, but also from sales.
So let's summarize. We kind of hated on MQLs for a while, and I think we're gradually moving towards the alternatives that are available there right now. So we've figured out that we can't rely on MQLs. They're not equal. It's a vanity metric that we come up with basically just to have something to lean on as marketers because very often we don't have enough. We don't have our foot in the sales process. So what is the alternative right now? So from what you say, you're suggesting that first things first, looking at intent and looking at an account, actually not looking at intent, looking at accounts and being aligned with your sales team on the accounts that you're after. So we're kind of moving from seeing who comes to us to trying to convert the accounts that we actually want to convert. But it's kind of like comparing two different things, inbound and outbound. But what I notice a lot of marketers sometimes do is they confuse inbound and outbound, and they try to get form fills in outbound. So basically, you are going after accounts that you're not trying to catch people. You're not just waiting for them to flow into your net. You are trying to catch them, right? But you are still expecting them because we're so accustomed to this approach of capturing leads, basically, that we transfer this inbound approach into our outbound. So let's talk about what we can do to avoid that and how we could actually build something measurable that can replace MQLs.
No, it's a great question. I think the first thing we do is have a fresh look at our market, right? And I think one of the ways you do that is understanding not just who's a great fit. Everybody has their ICP exercises, but it's understanding where your accounts are in market, right? Like who actually need to be nurtured down, who need to become aware of the use cases or challenges, maybe who even needs to become more aware of your brand and the category in some industries. And you can kind of start to understand where you want to pull the different levers from a marketing standpoint to show impact. Are you nurturing accounts down into the lower funnel stages, right? Are we showing increases in engagement? This goes back to how you want to fundamentally change how you're reporting on things. What are your leading and lagging indicators for, say, like top of funnel accounts where you want to see increased time spent with you, right? So what are metrics that you can start showing around that increased high value engagement. Like, are we seeing website lift? Are we seeing accounts that are new to site during a campaign? Are we showing accounts that are returning? Are we showing accounts that are starting to trend in certain intent, right? Like, um, that's where we can really start to understand, are we resonating in the right way, and are we doing the things that are moving an entire account, not just a single lead, down into kind of that buying territory. I think oftentimes when people report on campaigns, they report on the volume based metrics, right? Like, how many leads do we get from it? How many MQLs do we get from it? And that shouldn't be the goal of campaigns moving forward. I think is really the crux of that. Then for the accounts that are in market, as you're talking about those lower funnel metrics, right? Like, you really want to start identifying things like how many opportunities are coming from what we consider in market accounts. You know, how many contacts are on these opportunities, right? Like, can we incentivize that right behavior?
What do you mean by incentivizing the right behavior?
Well, I think oftentimes, you know, especially with sales, and it's not just with sales teams, but it's often with marketing too. But people can mistake activity with productivity, right? So it's just like, if we're doing a lot of things all at once, and you know, we look busy, right? People think that we're, you know, we're going to be successful. And when we talk about like the sales process and where this fits into their day to day, right, is like, if can you start incentivizing things that de deprioritize just a bunch of tasks and focus on the right tasks. And sometimes that has to translate in different ways, right? So one of those is like, can we get them to start being spiffed on having opportunities with more than one contact on that opportunity? Um, can we incentivize them working and converting what we consider like an MQA, right? How do you start, especially if you're starting new and you're starting fresh with a program? Like, if you want to get that type of behavior built, like, get alignment with your SDR leadership, get alignment with your revenue teams, and say like, what are things that we can do to help build this into your processes and incentivize that behavior? So um, sometimes people, you think, oh, they're just going to do it because this is the new rules of engagement, but you know, one, you know, old old kind of old habits die hard, and you
Yeah.
know, it's hard to break them. And then a lot of times people don't want to look like they're not doing anything, right? So if they feel like, well, we used to have all these tasks and now we don't, like, you still have a lot to do. You still have a lot to penetrate into an account, but how you report on them, I think, has to be reflected in. And then can you get alignment on the incentivization around doing the right things to the right people at the right time, and having that reflected in your pipeline and your conversion? I think those are the things that really get people to buy in. And it's not just a marketing thing. Again, it's like it's a sales thing. So um, yeah, it's almost a necessity now too, because if you just rely on task based prospecting, then yeah, they're going to probably just flood that entire account regardless of their title, their persona. They're just going to start hitting everybody in the account with the same thing at the same time. Like, yeah, well, I'm working the account, like you said. It's like, no, like, you're not. Like, you're just flooding them, right? And that's looking very busy, but it's not being very productive. So it's all about building the right habits.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, while you're explaining this, I'm like, this is kind of what they were supposed to do with MQLs, but then we mess that up sometimes. But if you mess up MQL system once, then you lose the trust. You have to come up with this another system that you have to persuade them to follow.
Very true. Yeah.
But yeah, kind of. But then like the new system, I think, is a lot more reliable and kind of reflects the B2B buying cycle a lot more.
Well, and you also don't want the sales team or anybody else drowning in opportunity, right? Like you might have a great tech stack, you might have a lot of tools at your disposal, right? But like, if they don't know how it fits into the process or who to use it with or how to prioritize them, then a lot of times you get teams that are, you know, kind of like laissez-faire in terms of how they are using gifting or using emails or using webinar invites or what have you, right? Like the gifting example, like, so a couple different places I've worked at, we've used either uh, Postal or Sendoso. It doesn't really matter. You can use ReachDesk, you do it with anybody. But they have gifting guides that you can develop for your team to say, instead of just sending out, you know, $10,000 worth of e-gift cards to people to try to get a meeting, which honestly sounds a little desperate, right? Like, how do you actually align it with where they are in the market and how do you add value? And so, when we talk about multi-threading and how that can be multi-channel, is like you have to align the tactics to where people are or where an account is in the market. And when we developed the gifting guide with that in mind, it was like, what are the qualifying criteria to actually warrant sending a gift? And it's not always an e-gift card either. Like it's easy to do that over email. I get it, but it's also very easy to ignore. And so one of the things we did was we set criteria around what journey stage should the account be in, right? We don't want to just be sending a bunch of e-gift cards to top of funnel accounts who've never heard of us before, right? You're just kind of throwing money away. Then when you get down to other milestones and timing, like were they part of campaigns? Were they the right persona? Is it the right time around timing of the year even? And then what's the objective of the gift? Is it to follow up after a webinar? Is it to celebrate an event that you've found on LinkedIn Sales Navigator to help break through? Can you talk about something that they posted on LinkedIn around an interview or a podcast or any PR that came from the account that you saw that was like a big milestone event? Like make it relevant to them to kind of like help celebrate. And when people see that, not only does it show that you did your homework, but it breaks through in a way where like just a regular e-gift card to say, hey, I'd like to understand your priorities. Here's $10 for coffee. You want to chat about it? Like, no, like that's kind of lame, right? So
It is really. It's desperate. It's desperation.
it's
It screams
desperate, right?
desperation.
And
If
then it's
trying
very
to bribe
easy
them for it for a
bribing them for
discovery.
nothing. Yeah. And when you talk about senior leadership, oftentimes like that's not enough to break through anyway. So if you can actually get a gift amount, like we also gave them here gift amounts based on the personas and the milestones and where an account is in their journey, that would vary, right? And so we also gave them kind of recommendations for different personas, different things. And then we encourage them to do their homework on the account and say like, hey, are they interested in the outdoors? Like, could you send something that's more outdoorsy for them? Do you know if they have an interest in particular, like movies or shows or something like that? Like, cater it to them in a way where it's not just like it's actually personal. It's not just personalized, and I think that's another way to help break through. And then also, how do you measure the impact of that? Like, how many additional meetings did we get from sending these gifts? How many were actually attached to opportunities? How many follow-on items did we get from this? So like you also align measurement not just to was the gift accepted or how many were sent out, but to what end. And I think that's also where we got buy-in, where it was a tool that was available to the sales teams, but if you kind of just leave them to their own devices, or you just make it very generic and you just pepper people with e-gift cards, like you're desperate, you're wasting money, and you're not breaking through. And I think when you start giving people those kind of like multi-threading guidelines, you can actually activate a tactic like gifting in a really effective way.
Yes, I'm actually developing a gift giving strategy right now. So that is a very hot topic for me, and I do agree that anything less than a personalized gift in top of funnel to an account that you sort of already have a relationship with is desperation, and it's probably not going to turn into a customer. I think you will have, you'll have the MQL situation. You'll have them accept the gift. You'll measure how many you send. When I'm measuring stuff, I like to have a control group, and I like to have, the group that has been, exposed to the tactic that I'm using. But that is, again, not ideal, I think, because in B2B marketing, like the deals are so complex with so many people involved that I think they are being influenced by a lot of different factors, and sometimes you can do a flip, but then it won't translate into revenue just because it's the wrong timing or they had management change or something. So and like a lot of there are some products in the market already that do this, but measuring your influence rather than
Mm-hmm.
rather than doing attribution, I think is the way to measure your activities, because you can measure your influence, you can compare it to other opportunities, but then when you measure influence, you can look at everything that you've done for the account, because it's not like, oh, it's not the B2C situation where you snap interest and they buy your shoes, whatever.
Right.
Deals can go on for half a year, for 2 years even. And obviously marketing is doing something for this all of the time, like the entire cycle. And then imagine you come in and you say, oh, we closed this enterprise because I sent them this note card from a, you know, I sent them this note card, so I think this is the attribution. And this happens when you have this attribute, like with every attribution model, when you're doing attribution, not influence,
Mhm.
you kind of drop into this trap. You walk into this trap where you're like, oh, if it's first touch attribution, oh, we met them at the event, and that was a person who left the company like 2 years ago, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not when it started. That's not when it
Right.
started. Or last touch point would be like this gift giving card. And you're like, oh, it's the gift card. Why don't we invest $2 billion into the gift card?
Right. It's an
So
incomplete story. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it's an incomplete story. Oh my God, we are off topic, I think. We're gonna have to call the episode "How MQLs Are Leading Us On" and some other stuff that we discuss.
And some others.
And some other stuff that we think that we like talking about. Um, okay, I actually have a question, because I asked you, what do you think is the alternative to the MQL? You give me a nice description of how we should go on about it, but what do you do when you don't have enough accounts with intent and you have a quota? That's where you are in a situation like, I know that you have probably, I mean, according to your experience, you work at larger companies where you have like the type of the product that you sell, you have a huge total addressable market, right?
Mhm.
You can assess the market, and then you can pull the accounts with intent. Have you ever been in a situation where you're like, wow, the accounts with intent are not giving us enough revenue. We need to either generate intent somehow, or we need to build like a more aggressive strategy with going after like a tier one account that we have to convert to hit our quota.
Oh, yes. In fact, when we did the initial overhaul, when I joined Venofi, we actually had, I would say we overcorrected the criteria for what constituted an MQA. And we shrunk the volume to the point where people were like, well, that's not enough. That's just not enough pipeline. That's not enough counts to work, right? Like I think we shrunk it. Like it got to like 12% or something like that from where it was previously, which is like a little bit of an overcorrection. So the problem that we had before was that we had too many MQAs. The criteria was very broad. They weren't actually in market, and so sales had lost confidence in the model, saying like, I'm not going to work a bunch of accounts that just spend a bunch of time, on Venofi.com or doing like very high value things, right? Those are not in market, right? They don't even know what some of our products were. And so when we put some of this rigor around the criteria, it was like they had to have certain, um, you know, engagement minutes through demand base. We had to have certain intent surface for them within a given period of time. And to me, it's always kind of like striking a balance of like, do you have enough of a body of work there at the account to illustrate mindset and engagement? Is it like a roughly 3 month period to show like, is there consistent interest in this area that you can, still prospect into and still market to them in a thoughtful way? But if you keep it too concentrated or too, um, if you have the standards that are kind of like too much rigor there, you could really kind of miss out on some of the interest and opportunity there because if you get too specific, like you just really you might actually miss the opportunity to talk to them about something that adds value. So we throttled back a little bit on some of the criteria. Like we adjusted the engagement minutes, we adjusted some of the intent, and we kind of started to see more of a predictive volume of MQAs that started to flow through um, that were meeting the the rules of engagement that we asked the SDRs to go through. So they weren't feeling overwhelmed, but they weren't feeling like they had, too few to work. So it was striking a good balance there. And then when we saw the quality, we started to assess the quality of the accounts. It was, well, are we having enough conversations there where we feel like we're actually capturing accounts that are in market? And more or less the answer was yes. Like we were having more productive conversations. We were talking to more of the right people because the intent that was surfacing at the account was more aligned to the personas that we cared most about. And so, um, it was obviously something that was evolving and something that we were updating quarter by quarter and reevaluating. But I remember when we first kicked that off, we were like, whoa, that volume is not going to do it. So you have to kind of have a good feedback loop with your sales team, and then you also have to kind of evaluate the volume in a way to say like, hey, are we actually like missing opportunity here by being too stringent? Like, are my standards too high? Um, so it's always about striking a balance and making sure you're looking at the data consistently with the teams.
Yeah, but what you're saying is that you, again, I think you have I think you have the luxury of a large total addressable market, so you could adjust the criteria of how you qualify and like how you identify intent. So basically, by changing the criteria of measuring intent, you were able to find this balance with your sales team to give them over MQAs, right?
Oh, it
Like the
wasn't just
right.
intent. Yeah. I mean, it was also first party engagement. It was time spent, and it was the frequency of this too. So it wasn't just certain activities. It was like, do we actually have high value engagement and intent happening within a given period of time with the right frequency? So I think that's something you can't really throttle when you're looking at an MQL. Is like you don't always say like within a time frame, and you're also looking at um, the quality of the engagements to get the volume that you want. Like I think you have a lot more levers that you can pull and a lot more data points that you can look at from an account standpoint, especially when you start incorporating intent. And then I think the other thing I would like to add too is that it has to align to your go-to-market goals, right? So sometimes it's going to dictate if you do like more of a one to few versus a one to one in certain cases. And so like, where do they spend their time? Do we have a go-to-market goal about penetrating a particular um, vertical or industry? Are we trying to expand within one? Um, are we doing a competitor take back campaign? Like, what is something that we can also point to that you can align it to versus just like the overall holistic, demand gen? So it can also depend on what your go-to-market goals are too, I would say.
All right. So what are the lessons learned that you think people should take away from this episode?
I think some of the lessons learned that we talked about was like marketing being involved at every step of the journey for an account is obviously really important, and how you measure success across that journey shouldn't be uniform, right? And I think a lot of the reporting that we're doing now for a campaign is oftentimes focused on volume of MQLs, converting MQLs, things like that, right? But it's not telling the whole story of that campaign or the journey of an account or set of accounts, right? So the other thing is incentivizing the right behavior, making sure that you're aligned with your sales team around the right types of behaviors that you want them to do, and not just making sure that teams are busy or not. Like I think that's a surefire way to lose trust with the sales team if you're just lobbing stuff over, or they're trying to feel busy. And can you get multiple contacts on an opportunity? Can you get spiffs around reps that are getting MQAs to convert forward, right? Like get them excited about it. I think it's important. And then one thing that we didn't touch on, but I want to make sure I mention here is making that there's consistent reinforcement with these teams kind of across the year and across the quarters, right? Like how are they leveraging the tools at their disposal, optimizing the processes, understanding and getting good feedback loops around the data that they're getting back on their accounts, the questions that they're having on their calls. It's all very important, right? So this is never like a set it and forget it. It's always a reinforcement there. And then um, the fact that multi-threading should also be multi-channel, and setting in some really good criteria around when to use certain tools and to what end and how you want to measure them. So, MQLs are easy to report on, but they're also very misleading. And so find a way to take it a step deeper. And with an account-based model, you really should be looking at the buying teams and the quality of the footprint that you have there, and how do you actually penetrate an account, and not just report on vanity metrics, because it's very easy to be led astray by a single lead, no matter how engaged they are, right? It's not indicative of a mindset in an account.
So, Alex, have you ever been led on by an MQL from your experience?
Well, not me personally, but one of our best reps, one of our best AEs was working in an enterprise energy company, one of the top energy companies, and had done an incredible job of prospecting and built a really solid foundation with kind of like a mid-senior manager on their IT team. And um, she was incredible. Like, I remember the lead had like validated use cases. She was eating up all the content we were sending and sharing. She had kept in consistent contact for several weeks. It's kind of like everything you would want in a solid lead, right? Like, so you're thinking all things are great, but we were so enamored with this one lead and this one relationship and nurturing it that we stopped prospecting into the account, and we stopped, asking for introductions and doing these things, right? We were kind of hitching our wagon to this one lead because they were so great. But what we were not privy to was that one of our competitors was also working this account, and they were working at a level higher. I think they were at the VP level, and the mid to senior level manager was unaware of this, right? So while she was all excited and doing a great job of trying to, facilitate things, we were kind of like lingering with these promises of introductions, unaware that the competitors had penetrated the account as well at a higher level. And when those introductions didn't come, we ultimately lost the deal because, again, we had hitched our wagon to the wrong lead, and we were unable to align their leadership and facilitate introductions or meetings. So, even all this to say is that I would, even a great lead, no matter how engaged they are, can lead you on, and you have to be very careful with, focusing and being too myopic on one lead, no matter how great they are or how great they seem.
Multi-threading.
It
Multi-threading is
always
the
comes down to
answer.
multi-threading. Always comes
Yeah,
down to multi-threading.
yeah, it's true. All right, so I guess that's it. We are at time. Alex, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your experiences and expertise with us. I hope we'll do that again someday.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for the conversation, and absolutely look forward to the next time.
Yeah.
All right.